All right, let's turn our attention now to the Middle East, where Egypt has proposed a 2-day truce in Gaza as a prelude to a longer ceasefire. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi called on Hamas to free 4 of the Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. He proposed more negotiations to follow that release within 10 days. Well, meanwhile, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry said Israeli strikes killed at least 45 people, mainly in the north of the Strip. UN Chief Antonio Guterres said he was shocked by what he called the harrowing levels of death, injury and destruction.
The Israeli military strike centered on the north of Gaza on Sunday, including here in Nazla, just north of Gaza City. The Palestinian Red Crescent reported deaths and injuries when a home there was struck. Israel says it targets Hamas positions. Hamas is backed by Israel's archenemy in the region, Iran. Tehran also backs Hezbollah in Israel's neighbour, Lebanon, whose fight with Israel has intensified in the year since the October the 7th attacks. Fears that proxy war between Israel and Iran could boil over into direct combat grew late on Saturday, when Israel's much-anticipated retaliation came for Tehran's unprecedented attack earlier this month. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the strikes as a success.
Whoever hurts us, we hurt them. This is the principle that guided us to this day. This is the principle that will guide us in the future as well. The attack in Iran was precise and powerful and achieved all of its goals.
Calming fears among some of a further escalation, the response from Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei on Sunday was to say that the strikes, quote, should not be either exaggerated or downplayed, and he stopped short of calling for a retaliation. But politics in Tehran and secretive high-level talks in Doha will be far from the minds of people like these. Gazans struggling simply to stay alive until the agreement on a ceasefire, be it temporary or permanent, can finally be reached.
Let's bring in Hans-Jakob Schindler. He's a Middle East security expert and the senior director at the Counter Extremism Project here in Berlin. Hello to you, Hans. So tell us what is behind this new proposal put together by Egyptian mediators. Why is it just for such a short and limited truce?
Well, I mean, the main challenge that Hamas now has is that it has to prove that it can deliver any kind of concessions it may or may not make in negotiations, because we have an acting leader, Khaled Mashal, but we don't have a leader of Hamas officially announced yet, and we have no leader in Gaza. So Khaled Mashal has been out of Gaza and out of the Palestinian territories for over a decade. So if he would agree to, let's say, a 2-day ceasefire and the release of some hostages, can he actually deliver the release of these hostages or the end for 2 days of the fighting in the Gaza Strip? Because inside the Gaza Strip, no successor of Sinwar has been announced yet.
But if we have been hearing that Hamas wants a full end to hostilities and Israel saying it's completely opposed to agreeing to a full cessation of hostilities, is there any chance or any hope of reaching some sort of deal?
It's going to be very complex, this contradiction that Hamas wants all the Israeli military out and Palestinian prisoners, and Israel wants all of the hostages and destroy Hamas in Gaza Strip completely, is really hard to resolve. So a partial deal, as it has been for a long time, is always possible. A final deal that settles the Gaza Strip would require some political decisions about the future of the Gaza Strip. Is it going to be the Israeli military? Is it going to be an international force? None of this really has been decided on the Israeli side. So I'm not sure how they can get to a broader agreement. But I think the first round, and that's why Egypt only offered this 2-day suggestion, is to make sure that the Hamas can actually deliver.
Well, we should mention that Egypt made an announcement of its proposal the same day that Israeli mediators traveled to Doha for another round of ceasefire talks. This round, again, being brokered by the United States. But just how much leverage does Washington even have at this point on Israel?
Well, it is apparently not quite small, because if you look at what the Israeli discussion was about the retaliation against Iran and what the actual retaliation was, it followed very precisely the publicly made US suggestions of concentrating on key military sites, not on the oil facilities and not on the facilities of the nuclear dossier. And there was even from less radical politicians on the right that are in the government right now, so Lapid, who is Likud, but not quite as strong as Netanyahu and others, they criticized it as being too small. So this attack really showed that the US holds still some significant influence over Israel. But Israel is very clearly going into a piecemeal fashion now. Netanyahu, after the death of Sinwar, said, we want a partial deal. We want individual Hamas commanders to lay down their arms in Gaza. We want individual commanders to release the hostages. So they're trying to break up the cohesiveness of Hamas within the Gaza Strip.
I'd like to ask you about Iran, because, as you mentioned, there were even some more moderate politicians in Israel saying that they didn't strike hard enough on Iran. Other remarks made by Israeli officials suggested that this could be the beginning of further strikes. So what is likely to happen between Israel and Iran in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I mean, this limited, very precise strike sent a couple of messages. Number one, Israel can strike anywhere in Iran at its will, including with warplanes, and there was no damage to any of those achieved. That's concerning for Iran. But the strike was so limited that it didn't create an uproar inside Iran. Iranians hardly realized, even those who lived in Tehran, that an attack was going on. So it's an opening for Iran to leave it at that. The one thing that strategically weakens Iran at the moment is the Israeli attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is the most important and key proxy of the proxy network of the Iranians, and removing them is going to be a big setback for Iran.
That was Hans-Jakob Schindler, Middle East security expert and senior director at the Counter Extremism Project. Many thanks indeed for all of your insights.
Thank you so much.